Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are jumping right into a formal academic review, unpacking post-colonial theory through some deeply political literature. Specifically, we're going to explore the reality of resistance in Mahasweta Devi's incredibly powerful short story, Draupadi. So, let's just dive right in.
Right out of the gate, let's establish our scholarly tone here. We are embarking on a dialectical journey, tracing this intense, visceral clash between immense state power and raw tribal resistance. Now, you should know, Mahasweta Devi wasn't just a literary figure sitting at a desk. She was a fierce political activist who worked directly with marginalized Adivasi, or tribal communities in India. For her, literature wasn't just art. It was a direct political intervention.
Here's our roadmap. We'll start with the context of the Naxalite movement, compare the intellectual versus the insurgent, contrast classical myth versus modern rebellion, confront patriarchal violence and power, analyze defiance through final silence, and finally, grapple with the question, can the subaltern speak?
All right, part one, context of the Naxalite movement. You see, Mahasweta Devi's fiction absolutely does not exist in a vacuum. It is rooted directly in the bleeding reality of India in the 1960s and 70s. The Naxalite movement was a radical peasant uprising that kicked off in 1967 in a village called Naxalbari. Landless peasants and tribal communities literally rose up against landlords in the state. And it's crucial to understand, for these marginalized rural populations, this wasn't some abstract ideological debate. It was a desperate, literal fight for survival, dignity, and basic land rights in the face of deep economic injustice.
Tracing this timeline, we can see how post-independence inequalities sparked these uprisings. And the state? Well, they responded with severe military repression. Rather than treating these struggles as, legitimate political grievances, the state escalated things. They framed these incredibly complex social issues purely as criminal security threats. And that framing led straight to intense surveillance, custodial violence, and the targeted elimination of insurgents.
Moving on to part two, the intellectual versus the insurgent.
This brings us right into the narrative of the story itself and the core clash of perspectives between our two main narrative forces. On one side, you've got Senanayak. He represents the detached, intellectual, and strategic arm of state power. He actually studies insurgency, reads about tribal psychology, but he uses this knowledge purely to eliminate them. To him, they're just criminal files, targets. On the other side is our protagonist, Draupadi. She's a visceral, marginalized tribal woman actively fighting for her community's survival. She views herself as a political actor resisting oppression, but the state, they absolutely refuse to see her that way.
So this brings up a crucial concept, epistemic violence. When the state, represented by Senanayak, labels Draupadi as nothing more than an insurgent or a criminal target, they're committing epistemic violence. They're completely erasing her political motives, her legitimate grievances, her humanity, replacing her lived reality with a sanitized, bureaucratic category that justifies her elimination. It's wild, but language itself literally becomes a weapon of power here.
Part 3. Classical myth versus modern rebellion. This is a brilliant literary juxtaposition Mahasweta Devi uses to expose the extreme vulnerability of modern subaltern women. She deliberately names her protagonist Draupadi, which is a colloquial version of Draupadi from the great Indian epic, the Mahabharata. Now, in the epic myth, Draupadi is publicly humiliated and disrobed in a royal court, but she's saved by divine intervention, right? Her sari miraculously becomes endless. But in stark modern reality, Draupadi faces horrific custodial violence, and there is no divine rescue. There is no endless sari coming to save her. This violent contrast strips away any romanticization of suffering, showing us for sure that the modern marginalized woman is entirely unprotected.
Which leads us to part 4, patriarchal violence and power.
The story forces us to confront this harrowing reality of how gender is specifically weaponized by the state during counterinsurgency operations. Custodial sexual assault isn't depicted as some random act. It's a deliberate, calculated political weapon designed to mandate submission. The state fully expects that after experiencing such profound violation, the female victim will be consumed by humiliation. They expect her to withdraw, to hide, and to become utterly silent. So the tribal woman ends up facing a double silencing, once by state power and again by patriarchal norms.
But wait. Part 5, defiance through final silence.
Because Draupadi, she doesn't follow the state's script. In this unforgettable climax, she completely flips it. After surviving extreme custodial assault, she's ordered to wash and present herself to Senanayak. Her captors, of course, expect her to cover herself in shame. Instead, she point-blank refuses to clothe her wounded, bleeding body. She walks right out and confronts the commander directly. She weaponizes the very violence inflicted upon her, refusing to let them hide what they've done.
And this, right here, captures the absolute essence of her defiance. By completely rejecting the logic of shame, Draupadi disrupts the entire patriarchal framework. She doesn't need to deliver some long political monologue. Her naked, bleeding, silent body becomes a massive, disruptive speech act against both masculine and state authority. She forces her oppressor into immense discomfort, proving that power is never absolute as long as the oppressed refuse to cooperate with their own humiliation.
Finally, Part 6. Can the subaltern speak? This dramatic climax brings us into our final academic debate, drawing on the renowned theories of postcolonial scholar Gayatri Spivak, who, fun fact, actually translated this story into English. I want to pose this heavy provocation to you. When Draupadi performs this incredible act of defiance, does she actually achieve true agency, or does she remain a subaltern? To answer that, we have to look at Spivak's criteria. A subaltern isn't just someone who's poor. It's someone completely, structurally excluded from institutional power. Their speech doesn't shape law or policy or official history. So, based on this, Draupadi absolutely remains a subaltern. She lacks representation in the legal system. There's no court hearing for her. The state still totally dictates her official identity as a criminal. Even with her mind-blowing bravery, she has zero institutional recognition.
And that reveals the core tension of the whole story. Draupadi achieves this incredible emotional and symbolic rupture. I mean, she shakes Senonite to his core and completely unsettles his authority. But, and this is a massive but, the military structure itself, it remains unbroken. The soldiers still have their weapons. The state apparatus that allowed her assault to happen is entirely intact. She doesn't magically gain political representation or justice just because she was brave.
What Mahasweta Devi does here is truly remarkable. She flat out refuses to give us a neat moral lesson or a clean, comforting victory. She forces us, the readers, to sit with the extreme discomfort of this unresolved tension. The subaltern struggle is incredibly complex. Draupadi can't fully enter the dominant discourse, but she has the power to expose it, to completely unsettle it, and to prove undeniably that she is not defeated.
Which leaves us with this lingering, provocative thought to end our explainer today. If a subaltern can shout through their silence, disrupt authority, and lay bare the brutality of the state, yet still remain entirely structurally excluded from justice, what does it truly take for the marginalized voice to be officially heard and recognized by the systems of power? It really challenges us to reconsider the very nature of agency, representation, and what it truly means to speak. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpack this fascinating material today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.